Hello and welcome to this advanced Spring Framework training course. In this course, we'll be looking at remoting and web services in Spring. I'm Richard Chesterwood, a programmer from the UK, working for the Virtual Pair Programmers, and I've recorded many of Virtual Pair Programmers courses, including the original Spring Framework Fundamentals course. In this opening chapter, I'll introduce the structure of this course. It's a little more complicated than some of our other courses because this is an advanced course. I'll be giving you a guided tour of the practical work that you'll be doing on the course as well. Originally, we were going to release this as a single big advanced Spring course, but we soon realised that each area in Advanced Spring is big enough for a course in its own right. So this is the first in a series of advanced courses for Spring, and we'll be releasing more in the future. So for this module, the focus is on remoting and web services, and it consists of 3 parts. Part 1 is what I call the traditional remoting part, which is mainly RMI, or Remote Method Invocation, and how it works with Spring. I'm guessing that many of you won't be using traditional remoting on your projects, so I've kept this part quite short. It will be about 2 hours long, but there will be some useful concepts in there. Part 2 will be covering SOAP-based web services, and this part will be about 6 hours long. This will also cover the Spring side project called Spring WS, which I know that many of you are curious about. We've had a lot of requests to cover that. But the biggest part of the course is part 3, which is based on REST-based web services. And as this perhaps is the most common use of web services today, we'll spend a full 12 hours on that. And be prepared, I'm going to go pretty deep into REST. The 3 parts are independent. If you're only interested in REST, for example, then you can go straight to that part and get started. Or, if you prefer, you can treat it as a traditional course and work through each chapter in turn. I think I recommend you go for that approach because there are going to be some useful concepts that we pick up in, say, the RMI part of the course that might prove useful later on. However, if you go through every chapter, then watch out, there is some duplication because some of the issues that we have to deal with crop up in all 3 parts. And as I can't assume that you've watched all 3 parts, then I will have to repeat myself occasionally. Like all of our courses, the pattern is that you'll be watching informal videos where I describe some aspect of Spring remoting, and I hope you won't be just sitting there listening. I expect that you'll have your IDE open and you'll be working with me, coding alongside me. We've tried to make the whole experience as close as possible to virtual pair programming. There are going to be 3 major exercises, one for each of the parts, and these won't be quick exercises, these are proper programming challenges. The practical for REST is particularly deep, so expect to spend possibly a day or 2 just on that exercise. So you'll be writing your own code almost from scratch, but if you need help, we'll also provide full worked solutions in the form of pre-prepared code, and there are also video demonstrations, so you can't go far wrong. If you get really stuck and you need help, then we have a support system where one of our support team will get you going again. The only thing is we can't promise to be quick. We usually answer within 1 or 2 business days, but even if we take a while, we will be able to help you. The best thing to do is to go to the contact page at virtualpairprogrammers.com and follow the link to technical help. You'll then need to find the Spring Remoting course from the drop-down list here. Although, as it says here, if you've bought the DVD from a different site such as Amazon, then just select the other option and continue from there. And if you possibly could, provide as much information as you can, full description of the problem, any Java stack traces if you have any, and any supporting files. And as we say here, usually a full zip of your project folder will be helpful. As this is an advanced Spring course, you will, of course, need some prior knowledge of Spring. If you've done our Spring Fundamentals course, then that will be perfect. But if you haven't, then you'll need to understand at least the concepts of dependency injection, and we'll be writing an application using a combination of XML and annotations, so you'll need to be aware of that. We won't be doing any Spring AOP, and although we will be working on an application that uses a database, in fact it will be a JPA-based database, we won't be doing any configuration around that area, so you certainly don't need to be an expert at, for example, Spring Data. From standard Java, you'll need the basics of Java, you'll need to be able to write classes and to be able to create objects, and you'll need to be able to confidently work within your IDE of choice. I'll be saying a few more words about the IDE in a moment. So the practicals are really important for this course. And the system that you will be working on will be the Customer Relationship Management System that we built back on the Spring Fundamentals course. Now don't worry if you haven't been on the Spring Fundamentals course, I'll be providing you a full working version of that system, and your job in this course will be to build upon it and extend it. After every chapter, please make sure that you take a copy of your project folder and store it somewhere safe, because you might want to go backwards sometimes, and at least once on the course you will need to do exactly that. If you've been on the Spring Framework Fundamentals course, then you're pretty much ready to go. You can either use your own implementation that you have, or you'll find one in the Practicals and Code folder for the course. And this is either the last chapter in the chapter list on the downloads page on our site, or it's a folder on the CD. And you'll find a folder there called Starting Workspace. I'll show you in a few moments how to get that up and running. But while I'm here, I'll also show you that there's a folder called Projects at the end of each chapter. And what I've done in here is I've taken a snapshot of the development area of the project on the videos at the end of most of the chapters. So for example, chapter 18 is on content negotiation, and in here you'll find a full snapshot of exactly what the project was like at the end of that video. Some of the chapters don't have a snapshot. For example, here, this is a snapshot of the project as it was at the end of chapter 17, and there isn't one for 16 and 15. That's purely because those three chapters would have been recorded in a single block, and I just didn't know at the time they were going to be separate chapters. But those three chapters will be very similar, so the snapshot will apply to all three. Notice there's no snapshot for chapter 14 because we don't do any coding in that one. So then, if you've been on the Spring Fundamentals course, then you're pretty much ready to go. Although, be aware that I have added some Spring MVC to the project that I'll be using on the videos. And that's just so that I can explain how Spring MVC will run in parallel with any web services that we build. Now, I know that many of you won't have been on our Fundamentals course because you already know Spring. So the rest of this video is for you. I'm going to give you a guided tour of the system. We'll get it open in the development environment. I'll explain the features of the system and some of the deeper aspects of the code. Now, I'm using Eclipse for the course videos. Now, technically, you can use any development environment that you prefer. However, I'm going to recommend that you use Eclipse purely so that if you have any problems, you'll be able to contact us and we'll understand exactly the state of your project. If you do decide to use another IDE like NetBeans or IntelliJ, that is fine, but you will need to accept that if you contact us, it is going to be harder for us to help you. Assuming you're going with Eclipse, which of course you can download from the eclipse.org website, it's a simple case of browsing to the Starting Workspace folder from Practicals and Code. And to keep things as clean as possible, I haven't included the settings files for the development environment. So you will by default go into the Welcome tab. By the way, you can use any version of Eclipse. It doesn't have to be the Java developers or the Java EE developers. Really doesn't matter for this course. Close the Welcome tab, and inside the Starting Workspace folder, there is a project folder called CRM System. And we need to get it into Eclipse. Now, a lot of our customers struggle with importing. I would recommend don't bother importing. Go to File, New, and select Java Project. Now, we know that the project exists, but we just need to make it a new project for this workspace. So, first of all, I don't know why this happens with my Eclipse, but I think I've got a misconfiguration here. It's giving me the option to use a specific JRE, and for some reason it's defaulting to a JRE called the CDC. Well, I definitely don't want that. I'm going to use the default JRE. I'm currently on Java 1.8, but you could use pretty much any recent version of Java. For the project name, we need to type in exactly the same name as the folder that you just saw, which is CRM System, and it's case sensitive. And you should see as soon as you hit that last character, we get an info. The wizard will automatically configure the JRE based on the existing source. And when you click Finish, and it's created a project, and it looks like it's all correctly working. I'm getting 15 warnings in my build, and those warnings are just trivial compiler warnings that you don't need to worry about. Now, my version of Eclipse has automatically configured the build path, which means that all of the jar files inside the lib directory have been added to the build path. If that's not happened to you, then drop down the lib folder, select all of the jar files, right-click, build path, and add to build path. I don't have that available because they're already on the build path. I think it's fairly accepted in Java circles now that a build tool such as Maven or Gradle, I personally prefer Gradle, but either of those types of build tools are the best way of working in Java environments. And I roughly agree. However, we're not going to use Maven for this course, and that's purely so that we don't get hung up or distracted with any Maven problems. If you want to work with Maven, then I recommend do the course exactly as we're doing it here, just sort of manually, and then you can add in Maven at the end when you have everything working. We do have a separate course, Java Build Tools, that covers Ant, Maven, and Gradle. So I know that the Spring Framework team strongly recommend the use of Maven these days, but we're keeping things simple, and I'll be giving you all the jar files that you need throughout this course. So if you did not do the Spring Framework Fundamentals course, then you'll be at a slight disadvantage because, of course, this CRM system will be new to you. It's a customer relationship management system. And in the Practicals and Code folder, I've included a copy of the original practical guide. This is the PDF that we shipped with the original Spring Framework Fundamentals course. And if you want to have a read of that, that will give you a background to the work we did there. Now, of course, most of this will be irrelevant to you. You certainly don't have to worry about things like AOP timing advice, but you'll find in here details of the steps that were carried out to build this project. And also towards the back of this book is the requirements that we used to define the system. So I'll quickly run through what these requirements were. In the customer relationship management system, we have details of customers, perhaps not surprisingly. But the main requirement for this project is that every time a customer calls our company, what a user will do is they will record the details of the customer's call. So the example here, at 4:30 p.m. on the 2nd of December, Larry from Acme Corp called, etc., etc. And then, as we're logging the call, we will record one or more actions against this call. So a customer has called, but that means that we need to do some work to help that customer. So we'll record that as an action to do. Something like, need to call Martha back on the 9th of December, blah, blah, blah. And there may be more than one action as a result of that call. And the actions are stored in a concept called a diary in our system. There's a bit more information there, such as the UML diagrams that we use to build the system, and feel free to have a look through that document at your leisure, but it will probably answer any questions that you have about the architecture of the system. So the Fundamentals course architected this, if we look in the SRC folder, as a series of services. So we have, for example, the easy one is this interface here called Customer Management Service. And this is a Spring service that's capable of, well, it's quite simple really. It's going to be creating, reading, updating, and deleting customer records. So fairly straightforward. On the Fundamentals course, we developed several implementations of this service, one of which is a mock. We won't need to worry about that for this course. But the production implementation is the one that is actually going to be used. Now, this production implementation uses a data access object. This one's called Customer DAO. Now, you won't need to worry much about the DAOs on this course. For the most part, they will just work. But one thing I want to mention, I'll just look at that Customer DAO interface. Nothing very interesting there. It really is just the low-level database operations like create, read, update, and delete. But the important thing is there are several implementations of this DAO. Well, there's two here. There's one which uses regular JDBC. That means just regular SQL statements. And there's one using JPA, that's the Java Persistence API. Now, if you didn't do the Spring Framework Fundamentals course, please don't panic and think that you need to understand JPA for this course. You really don't. If you're not interested in JPA, it does not matter. However, for this system, I have decided to use the JPA implementation throughout this course. And the reason for that is JPA, being quite a complicated framework, will raise some problems for us. And one of my objectives for this course was I wanted to make this course as realistic as possible. I don't want to hide potential problems that you might have in real life. In particular, and I'm way ahead of myself here, but in particular, I'll be looking at what happens when we try to do lazy initialization and remoting together. But if you're in the position where you've never used JPA, you don't care about JPA, then you can just treat that as a black box that should just work. On the Fundamentals course, we didn't have a fancy front end. We didn't have any web pages, and we certainly didn't use anything like remoting. So what we did on that course to simulate a real system is we built a little test harness called Simple Client Test. Very basic Java class with a main method. And the idea of this is that we can use the Spring container to get the services and exercise some of the functions. So the state it's currently in, I don't know why, but it will just be the state it was in when we finished the previous course. We've currently got a big block commented out here, so I'll come back to that in a minute. So you should be able to run this test harness and try out the features. And at the minute, we're searching for a customer that doesn't exist in our database because we simply haven't created them yet. So I can see here there's a block commented out, these 3 lines here. If you're following along, then I recommend you do the same. That is going to create that customer if it didn't already exist. So I expect to be able to run this time. And again, it's saying the customer didn't exist purely because when it got to here, it didn't exist, but then we will have created a new one. So I expect on future invocations now, we shouldn't see that error message, and we're not. But notice that we are seeing logging. That's coming from the Hibernate system if you're interested. Now, I think the idea behind this test harness was we could keep rerunning it, and at the start of every run, it deletes that customer if it exists, purely so that we start each run of the program with a completely clean system. I should explain that the data is being stored in a proper database, but the database that I'm using for this project is built into the jar files. It's a database called HSQLDB. It's the former hypersonic database. Now, this is a proper database, but it runs in an embedded mode, which means all its data will be stored in a file. So not production quality that, but that's just intended so we don't have to worry about setting up MySQL or Oracle or something horribly complicated like that. It will just run for you straight out of the box. And of course, at a later date, you could switch that for a proper database. The slight complexity of that is it will store all its data in a file, and the file is here, database.dat. It's currently opening up in Notepad, so if you right-click on that and open with text editor, it will open in Eclipse. And the key thing is that down at the bottom here are all of the insert statements it needs to do in order to restore the database for the next run. So you won't see any delete statements or update statements. It will just be insert statements. And I can't remember exactly what we were doing on the fundamentals course, but we had 3 existing customers, which were just stock data. These are the customer IDs starting 1000029. This is supposed to be the name of the company. I think that's the email address. That's any notes for the customer. And I think the last field, well, these are all nulls at the minute, but that's a telephone number, apparently. And we've just never bothered using telephones or email addresses. Now, throughout the course, I'm going to constantly use this customer here, 1000029, as a kind of reference customer. So if we need to do any tests, we'll do it against that one. But you can see there that due to my previous run, we also have this extra customer ending 39 in the database. Now, I know this might be a bit overwhelming if you're new to the project, but the one big thing I want to get across is the main requirement of this system is being able to record a call for a customer. Now, recording a call for a customer, the process is explained on page 4 of the document. And the way that recording calls works is via a separate service called Call Handling Service. The reason we have a service for this rather than just having a quick update method in the customer management service is that it's a 2-step process. In other words, it's a proper business process. We're going to update the customer with the details of the call, but we also go off to a diary service, and that's where we record all of our actions. I must admit, it is a little bit over-engineered, and I did that deliberately just to give us something to work against on the Spring Framework course. I didn't want to just do basic, boring database updates and deletes. So it's perhaps a bit richer than we needed, but we will be using this extensively on this course. All of the practical challenges will be for you to write a remoting front end to this record call process. So just going back to our test harness again, the rest of this test harness, I'll uncomment out all of the rest of these lines. The rest of this is exercising that record call feature. So here I'm creating a call object. Here I'm creating 2 actions as a result of that call. I'm then creating a collection of those actions. And then here's the key line. I'm calling that call service to record the call for that particular customer with that set of actions. And what we expect at the end of this run is we can then call the diary service and we can check that those actions have been recorded. I recommend before you start the course, if you didn't do Spring Framework Fundamentals, just get familiar with this system, check out that PDF document and give it a run for yourself. And you should be seeing a run something like this with some Hibernate logging to the console, proving that the database is working. And we're seeing there, here are outstanding actions, and there are indeed 2 actions. And finally, this is something that we did not do on the Fundamentals course. I've slightly extended this system to include a web page. Now, the reason for that is throughout this course, I'll want to make sure that any remoting that we do can run alongside a traditional web application as well. More details when we get there, but I've certainly not done anything particularly complicated. If you've done our Spring MVC course, then you'll be familiar with the concepts, but if not, I'll show you how to run this as a website as well. In your workspace folder, you will find a bat script, that's for Windows, called starttomcat.bat, which you can run. It will pop up a console, and that will effectively start up a web server. Now, let me just explain that I'm running here on Java 8 and I'm getting a warning up here about something not being supported in Java 8. If you get that warning, you can safely ignore it. I'll tell you the reason I've put that option in. It's this max perm size. Is later on in the course, especially when we do REST, you might have problems where you deploy your web service and it just freezes. It doesn't properly deploy. And then it crashes with a permgen error. Now that's related to the permanent generation in the Java virtual machine, which is way beyond the scope of this course. But it's a bit of an annoyance, but I hope the settings I've set here means that you shouldn't see that happen too often. What you want to see here is server startup in a particular amount of time. And the way that we deploy this application to the server is a slightly old-fashioned process that we use on this course, but I had to design really what was the simplest possible way of doing things without getting involved in any big server issues. Is I have an Ant script, this build.xml. You do not need to know Ant to be on this course. You can just run it without thinking about it, right-click, run as, Ant build, and that will compile all of your code. Do make sure it's compiling properly in Eclipse before you run the Ant script. You can get in a bit of a knot if you do that. Part of the script is that it will copy the generated WAR file across to the Tomcat directory. Now watch very carefully on the log. Did you see there was some output? Every 2 seconds, Tomcat checks to see if there's a new WAR file. And if there is, it unpacks it. So that means if I run the build again, straight to the Tomcat window, and I want you to sit and watch and just wait for this to tick over, and there it goes. Now, there is a slight problem that if you're too impatient and you run the build and then go straight to your web browser, you might get errors because it's actually still unpacking. What you're waiting for is the line that says, initializing Spring Framework, dispatcher, then you know it's deployed, and you want to see no exceptions or stack traces here in the console. You can then go to a browser, and if you visit the address localhost 8080, you should see the Tomcat welcome page. But to test if your web application's running, then you can follow the link to My Web App. Now, that's just the name of the WAR file that the Ant script built. And then /, and the page you're looking for is all-customers.html. Now, this is indeed a very, very dull web page, but I didn't bother making a fancy web page. But the point is I want to prove that it actually runs as a proper website. Now, a complexity, but it's not one we need to worry about too much for this course, is you can see here on the web page that the customer that we just created here in the standalone test harness doesn't appear to exist on our list here. And that's simply because the database here in my development area is different to the database over on the server. Here we have our database.dat script, which is the local version. That's the one that's got my new customer. But when it's deployed across to Tomcat, it's using a database in the Tomcat directory structure. As I say, I don't think that will affect us too much, but it might be something you want to be aware of. Now, I just casually ran the bat script there, but of course I realise many of you will be on a Unix or Linux-based operating system or Mac OS. Well, in that case, you just need to go into the Tomcat folder on a command line on the terminal window, and you can run the startup.sh script file. One last thing to say is I've put the Tomcat folder here in your workspace. Please do the same. It's the easiest way of working. Some of our customers have tried to move this Tomcat into their program files or something, and then the problem is it's difficult to do the deployment. Our Ant script does a very simple job. I don't really want to look at this build script, but the Ant script does a very simple job of just moving the jar file up into the Tomcat directory. If you're confident in doing so, you can change that around, but I recommend you leave it exactly as it is. So I'm a bit worried about this. I realise that if you are new to this project, then it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but we want to have something at least semi-realistic so that we can build some rich remoting functionality. And of course, that's going to be coming up in all of the rest of the chapters on this course. We've got 28 more chapters to get through. It's going to be a long roller coaster of a journey, but I hope you've got your environment set up and I hope you've had no problems doing so. But as I said in the introduction, if you've had any problems and you're stuck, please do contact us. I'd hate a minor problem with Eclipse or something like that to stop you enjoying the course. But once you're up and running, I'll see you either in part 1, part 2 or part 3, depending on where you're going to go next. If you're going to part 1, then it's going to be an overview of remoting.